We're going to talk today about some word pictures that we find in the Hebrew in Genesis 1:1 and some of the amazing hidden things when you just dig one layer deeper into Genesis, and it's amazing. So first, a couple notes about Hebrew and myself. I am not a Hebrew speaker or Hebrew scholar. I am a learner and I love it, and I think there's so much in it. And so the last few years I have here and there studied some biblical Hebrew. I feel like the statement is so true when it comes to anything that you're learning, but in particular, the Bible. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. And that can and has in the past stopped me from sharing because I know there's so much I don't know. But that should not stop us from sharing what we have learned about, especially the most important thing I believe that we can spend our time learning about. So we're going to start the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So in the Hebrew, that is bereshiyt bara Elohim et hashamayim ayet haaretz. So 7 words, and not all 7 of those words are actually translated into English. I'll show you a picture of the Bible that I'm using right here that for that first verse. So this is the Messianic Aleph Tav interlinear scriptures, and it breaks down every single verse. This is volume 1, so it's just the Torah. It breaks down every single verse to have the Paleo Hebrew, the current modern Hebrew, the transliteration of how to pronounce the Hebrew in English, and then the English at the bottom. So it is a lot, and I have barely scratched the surface, but there is so much in it. So you can actually see exactly where there might be something missing. So in this case, the aleph tav, or the et, in Hebrew is missing from the English. So while the English might have more words than 7 words, for example, the first word, bereshiyt, is 1 word in Hebrew, but in English it's in the beginning, which is 3 words. So it is really helpful to look back at the original language of the Bible, because you will see things that you will miss in once it's translated, like the missing aleph tav. Now, the aleph tav, we'll talk a little bit about that first. So first of all, Hebrew itself is a pictographic language. So it is a language that is not only an alphabet, so the aleph is an A, our English A, but it is also, aleph is also the number 1, and aleph is also the picture of an ox. So every single letter of the 22 letters has a picture and a number associated with it. So you can see already the layers start forming. So in Revelation 1, several places, and in John, Jesus says, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. So I'll read Revelation 1:8. It says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, says the Lord God. He who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty, the ruler of all. So Alpha and Omega is the Greek beginning and end, first A and Z. What Jesus would have been speaking would have been Aramaic, and so he would have said, I'm the Aleph and the Tav. So now take that to Genesis 1:1, where we see the aleph tav, and you will see it throughout Scripture. In fact, I have this Bible by the same ones, the complete Messianic aleph tav scriptures. This does not have all the Hebrew in it. All it does is take the English of the Old Testament and puts in red letters all the places where the aleph tav is, which is so helpful because it jumps out at you. So there are so many videos, which is one of the reasons I hadn't done this yet. There are so many great videos on YouTube about the aleph tav, about bereshiyt, Genesis 1:1. So if you want more in depth, there are so many resources for you to find that. Essentially, the aleph tav, and it was my first introduction really into the beauty of Hebrew and how amazingly layered this language is. And so aleph tav is the first and last letter of the Hebrew language, represents the strength of the covenant. And Jesus is essentially telling us, I am the aleph tav. So if you take that, where Jesus is telling you, I'm the aleph tav, and now you go and look throughout the Hebrew scriptures for all the places that the aleph tav is located, it is amazing, because essentially Jesus is telling us, that's me. And so that very first verse of the Bible is 7 words. But guess what the middle word is? That fourth word is the et, or the aleph tav. And so it makes like a menorah. You've got bereshiyt bara Elohim, in the beginning God created. And then there's the aleph tav right there, that central, you know, candle of the menorah. It's like all 3 on this side are pointing to that middle one, the aleph tav, Jesus, the Messiah, the strength of the covenant. And the last 3, the hashamayim, the heavens and the earth, v'haaretz, are pointing back to that center post, that aleph tav. And it is so amazing. So there's so much depth to this symbol, the aleph tav. I'm going to read you something that it says in the interlinear scriptures here. Firstly, the aleph tav, it is a sign or mark emphasizing the strength of the covenant. And secondly, because all covenants were made by the Father through Yeshua, who is the mediator of all things between Father and man, the aleph tav must also incorporate Yeshua because of his divinity. This was what the Apostle John was expressing in both his gospel and in Revelation, declaring the protocol of the Yahed Elohim, which is God, plural. If John is correct that the aleph tav is Yeshua and that all creation was created through him, as confirmed by Paul in Colossians 1:16, as well as the placement of 21 aleph tavs throughout the 6 days of creation week. This is so cool. I'm not going to get all the way into, more of the verse with this video, but I'll note this. That I learned in here is that the aleph tav is present when God is creating, but I'll read this from here. Notice that on the 3rd day, the Hebrew word bara for create, or asah for made, is not used. And it implies that the Yahed causes the land to appear and then the plants to grow. But nothing is actually created, or bara, from nothing. And consequently, there are no aleph tav symbols. So you can see in that picture of that first, you can see the red is the aleph tav, remember, and then there's no aleph tav symbols on that 2nd day, showing that, the 3rd day, because nothing was actually created. But the aleph tav, or the 2nd person of the Godhead, Jesus, has to be present in creation, because everything that was made through him, John 1:1. Okay, so now we're going to look at the first word, which is bereshiyt. Again, so many videos, a lot more in-depth videos on this word bereshiyt. But essentially, it is, when you look at the word picture for bereshiyt, in the beginning, it presents the entire gospel in just that first word. It's mind-blowing. So the bet, we'll look at each of these letters quickly. So the bet is a house. That's the word picture, or a dwelling. When you look at the Paleo Hebrew, it's like a picture of a tent with an opening. Then the resh represents a head, or the head person, the firstborn. It represents the head. Bet and resh next to each other create another word, and that is the word son. In Hebrew, I believe it's pronounced ben, in Aramaic bar, but that first 2 letters, bet resh, is the word son. Then aleph is the next letter, bet resh aleph. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It is often used just alone as a representation of God. El, like El Shaddai. Strong, or strength. the image, the paleo is an ox head, and then it represents God, the aleph. The next letter is the shin, and the paleo looks like teeth. Even the modern Hebrew, it looks like teeth, kind of. That's the picture, the pictograph, and it represents consume or destroy, destruction, is what the sheen represents. The next letter is yod, and it is a closed hand. So in Hebrew, there are two of the letters are hands. The kaf is an open hand. It's often used in like blessing, so an open hand of blessing, whereas the yod is a closed hand, more like a fist, and represents a finished work, like something is completed. And then the final letter is the tav, and that is a cross, represents the covenant, but that's the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So we've got bet, resh, aleph, shin, yod, tav. So there are actually so many words inside of the word bereshit. The preposition in comes from that letter bet. So in Hebrew, that's why it's not three words. So reshit is a word, and the bet that comes in the beginning of the word is showing you that this is in. So in the beginning, and then the first word that you see, bet and resh, is the word sun. But there are so many others. In fact, if you just continue bet, resh, aleph, that's the second word in the verse, bara, which means to create. So lots of little words inside of the big word. I'm not going to dive into all of those, mostly because I don't know all of them. And there are lots of videos looking at all of that. But what I do want to point out is the word picture that is created by bereshit. So the Son of God, right? So the house is that first letter. From the house, the first person or the head person, and then those together make son. So son, that's coming out of the house of God, that's the aleph, will be killed, that's the sheen, that's the consume or destroyed, by his own hand, that's the yod, on the cross, the tav. There's lots of ways that you can look at the word picture, obviously, because every single letter has several different meanings, and each of the word itself, there's lots of words in between. But that I've found from what I've watched to be the most succinct, easy to understand, and precise, putting the word picture together as a sentence for that first word, bereshit. The Son of God will be killed by his own hand on the cross. And is that not a picture of the entire gospel in the first word? Which brings you to the verse in Isaiah that says, I will declare the end from the beginning. In the beginning, literally in the beginning, the word beginning, he has declared the end, that the plan for redemption is placed in the word beginning, the first word of the Bible, from the beginning, before the fall of man even ever happens with Adam and Eve. Wow, it is so amazing. Okay, I want to go on to verse 2, which I did not realize there was so much debate over verse 2. I have in my Bible that I have used forever, from the very beginning, I don't know, I always have written became instead of was. So the earth became without form and empty waste. That expression is tohu vabohu. So I know now that there are older creationists and new earth creationists and people that have totally differing views on this verse 2. I believe that it is quite clear when you look at the Hebrew that it became waste and void, or tohu vabohu. Tohu is like destroyed, formless, wasted, and then bohu is empty, so unfilled. Unformed and unfilled is another way you could say it. I've read a book, I have it right here, that I would recommend if you're interested in going into more depth. It's called The Gap Is Not a Theory by Jack Langford. And I thought did an excellent job really diving into the time and showing that it is quite clear that there is a time period between verse 1 and verse 2 and verse 2 and verse 3 when creation begins. And we don't know how much time that is. That could be millions of years. Who knows how much time? But I think he does an excellent job. It's not that terrible, but it's quite a bit of reading into that. And he really goes into defending that position from the Bible and takes apart those first couple verses. So if you're interested in that, I'd highly recommend it. But what he's showing, and what I believe is clear in the verses for myself, is that in the first verse of Genesis, God creates the heavens and the earth. In the second verse, it is a picture of destruction or judgment. And so there's only two other places in the Bible that those two words, tohu vabohu, are used together, in Jeremiah and in Isaiah. And both are pictures of judgment. And so he uses that to paint this picture that tohu vabohu together is a picture of the earth in a judgment state. So when God created the heavens and the earth, it doesn't make sense that God would create something that is dark, formless, void, empty, not amazing. Because when God creates, he creates things in amazing, perfect states. So why would he create something formless and void? That doesn't make sense. What is happening in verse 2 is that the earth becomes formless and void as a form of judgment, which we see later on. The waters, the flood, that is a representation of judgment. And so in the same way, in the second verse of Genesis, this is judgment on the earth. Whose judgment? Well, when you look at other verses and start to piece things together, looks like it is the judgment of Satan when he is cast out of heaven. Also, he makes the point that I think is a really good one. In the Garden of Eden, when the tree is placed in the garden, it is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So obviously there had to be evil already. There had to be good and evil in the world, which is to say that Satan was already judged, which we know he was in the garden in a judged sense, but in the sense that he was trying to deceive God's creation. So we can take from Job 38, I believe it is. There's some hints there, because God says to Job, "Where were you when I created the foundations of the earth? When the morning stars sang for joy, and I'll put the verse here, but when the morning stars sang for joy and the sons of God rejoiced." And so that seems to indicate that is at the creation of the earth for Satan, that it was created for him. And wouldn't it makes sense then that he gets so angry and so bent on deceiving and destroying humans, because what was created for him was then taken from him and recreated for us. So lots of theology in that and all of that. But if you're interested in diving deeper, I'd recommend that book for sure. All right. So verse 2, "And the earth became tohu vabohu, without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God Elohim moved over the face of the waters. And Elohim said, Let there be light, and there was light. And Elohim saw that the light was good." It also, he notes that there's the word "it was good" is noted after each day of creation, but not in the first verse, not in the second verse. So, sorry, the earth itself is being recreated from verse 3 on. All right, one more thing I want to say from verse 1 through 4 that is so beautiful is about that aleph tav again. So the aleph tav appears, as we already talked about, as that fourth word in verse 1, but then it shows up again in verse 4. It says, and God saw aleph tav, the light, and it was good. So in John 1:4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines on in the darkness, for the darkness has never overpowered it. I love those two verses in John, and also just all the parallels that John is clearly making with Genesis is beautiful. But the light, Jesus calls himself the light, and then Elohim saw the light. But the aleph tav is right before the word light, which shows us, again, if we're subscribing to the fact that Jesus is represented by the aleph tav, and I'll put this up on the screen here so you can see that light, or the aleph tav, is right before it. And then I'll say one other thing. So we know that light was created on, the first day, that God said, let there be light. But we know that the sun, moon, and stars are not created until the fourth day. And I saw something that really helped me have a better understanding of this. The Hebrew word light, or, is one word. And then the light bearers, the great light and the lesser light, the moon, the sun and moon, it's ma'or, which is represented. What it shows is light holders. So God created light. It was there, but then he created light holders. So I just got this image that was so helpful in me understanding that there's light, but then how do we hold it? How does he hold it? He created the sun and the moon to hold that light. So it's not that the sun and the moon are creating the light. They are holding the light that God had already created. One other analogy that was so helpful for me when I was just researching some things from Genesis 1. When God separated the light and the darkness, why is it so important to have light and dark separate? Because if you imagine a picture, okay, one of these pictures behind me, if there was too much light on this picture, you wouldn't see the contrast of the horses with the light. But if there was too much dark, then I wouldn't see, there just would be no contrast. I have to have both the light and the dark to see the picture, to have the contrast. And that is so important. That's why he separates the light from the darkness. But we still have to have the darkness. We still have to have dark to actually show the light. Because if it was all just blinding light, well, then we couldn't actually see anything or see the picture. So Elohim, God, and then aleph tav, the light, and it was good. I hope that encourages you to dive deeper into the scriptures yourself.